Recording live at Studio 710 in beautiful downtown Vancouver, you're listening to License to Chill with your host, Bert Hick of Rising Tide Consultants. On today's show, Bert sits down with Ian Tostenson, the president and CEO of the BC Restaurant and Food Services Association. He previously served as director of the David Foster Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to helping support families with children in need of life-saving transplants. And in recent years, he's been a leading voice in the debate for RideShare, which would finally bring services like Uber and Lyft to Vancouver. We now go to Bert in conversation.
Good afternoon. My name is Bert Hick. Welcome to License to Chill. Our guest this afternoon is Ian Tostenson, who's president and CEO of the BC Restaurant Food Services Association. And we're going to have a conversation with Ian with respect to the restaurant industry, RideShare, which he's become a very strong advocate for, as well as issues around cannabis and the hospitality industry. And we also want to touch on the hospitality, the Restaurant Association Hall of Fame dinner that's coming up this fall, where they induct people from the restaurant industry, hospitality industry into the Hall of Fame for their contribution to the industry. So Ian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bert. It's a pleasure to be here.
And let's start off with RideShare. How does the president and CEO of the BC Restaurant Food Service Association get involved being such a strong advocate for RideShare? How did that come about? Did you just wake up one morning, decide you want to do this?
What happened was the issue of RideShare is so critically important to our industry from two angles, both from a safety patron, get them to the restaurant and back to their homes, but also, and we're going to talk about the labor shortage in a bit, but it's critically important for moving labor. We found that in markets that does have ride sharing, that your employees and workers can live further away from the businesses. You've got a larger pool of people to work in the restaurant. So about a year and a half ago, a coalition was formed called RideShare.com in British Columbia. And very quickly, we had about 40 businesses that signed up to it, all the ones from like Restaurant Association, Board of Trade. We had the BC Epileptic Society, Mothers Against Drinking and Driving, Canadian Institute for the Blind. So you can see that the wide spectrum of people that are interested in this topic is immense. They're all customers of restaurants in various ways. So we had a press conference, and we were all standing there, and the cameras were there, and no one stood up to talk. They said, well, someone's got to say something. So I thought, oh. So I just took that role. I'm comfortable with that role. And de facto, I became the spokesperson for the issue in British Columbia. So it's been about a year and a half. It's been a really intense issue. It's full of politics. It's been fascinating. But the good news is that sooner than later now, we will have ride sharing in Metro Vancouver.
I think it's terrific. I'm a big fan of RideShare. From my end in the hospitality industry, we need it. You have to wait forever for a taxi. People need to know that they can not drink and drive, that they don't have to drive. They get home, they can stay and have a glass of wine in a restaurant and take a Uber home. How do you see this rolling out then? As I understand it, the government is now going to allow the licensing of rideshare companies, and the municipalities are bringing into place their own policies. When will I be able to go on my app and order an Uber?
I think probably early as Halloween.
Really?
Lyft is a competitor of Uber, and they've announced that they are coming to British Columbia. Uber haven't said they haven't or have not come yet. And the real reason is that there's all this regulation, and the big one that's causing a concern is the fact the government has mandated that people get a Class 4 commercial driver's license versus having a Class 5 license. And that automatically takes a lot of people out of the pool, the potential pool to become drivers for ride sharing, because you need thousands of people to populate the system to make it work. Nowhere else in North America does anybody have a Class 4 requirement, with the exception of Alberta. That was an NDP government that brought that in, and the new government's going to take it out. So we've got Class 4. It was an intentional move by the government to slow down the process to help the taxi industry, and that's the politics of this whole industry in British Columbia. But we feel there's enough population base in Metro Vancouver to be able to handle that. But, Bert, some of this regulation that the government's been throwing at this whole issue, and both the Liberals and the NDP, it'd be like trying to block people from watching Netflix to bring back Blockbuster. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're trying to protect an industry that is old technology and is very finite in its ability to deliver customer service, that being the taxi industry, and at the expense of not bringing new technology. So what we'll find is in time that we will see both Lyft and Uber in this market, and we will see a successful taxi industry. But politics within the taxi industry are fascinating too, because there's two associations. There's the Vancouver Taxi Association and the BC Taxi Association, and they're grumbling about all this regulation, but they can't agree, either one of them, as to what it should be. So in the meantime, we've got some pretty good regulation for ride sharing. It means there's no boundaries, so they can drive from here, literally from Hope to Whistler. There's no cap on drivers, and the fee on the initial fee will be the same minimum fee that a taxi charges. So the only one that's real troublesome continues to be the Class 4 license.
Yeah, and on that point, it's my observations from my travels in the United States whenever I use Uber down there that most people do it on a part-time basis. They're doing it to supplement an income because they need the money to go support a family member that might be at university, to support a family member or relative that has a healthcare issue, seniors, parents, and they're doing it just to supplement their income, and they only do it part-time. They're not doing it full-time. Is that what you expect up here?
Yeah, so the typical driver in the States drives less than 18 hours a week, and you'll see mothers, students, retired people, all just making extra money. So these aren't, people will grumble about rideshare drivers. They're not full-time professions. They're designed to make some extra income. Interesting, in Alberta, which I mentioned has a Class 4 designation, of all the drivers in Alberta, there's only 100 women that drive for Uber in all of Alberta because the Class 4s block them. And what you typically see from an industry point of view in the States is you'll see women are about 38 to 40% of the overall drivers for ride sharing in the States. It's one of the arguments that we're advancing with the government is that policy might be a little bit discriminatory for certain groups. Interesting. You could get your car, take your neighbor's kids, drive them all over the place. You could go volunteer in the afternoon, drive some seniors around to whatever their activities are, go home, have dinner, decide to go ride sharing, and now you need a Class 4 license, and it doesn't make any sense. So we'll see.
Yeah, and the most memorable rideshare trip I took in L.A. was the driver was a retired LAPD police officer. She got into driving this because she's trying to raise extra money to support her parents who are on in years and they have health care issues. And she had some notoriety because she, as an LAPD police officer, she drove the lead LAPD police car that was following O.J. Simpson down the San Diego freeway years ago.
Really?
It was covered on CNN. And fascinating person, but I just find that it's interesting, though, the way they've set this up is a barrier for women into the industry because of their licensing requirement. And but yet they only want to drive part-time. And yet the system, as I understand it on ride-sharing, is that they get all the drivers through rideshare get a report every week as terms of how many miles or hours they drove. And so it's easy to track if somebody's doing part-time or full-time driving. And I can see it if you're a full-time driver, like a taxi cab driver, perhaps having a higher litmus test. But if you're just doing it part-time, as you just said, you're driving people around, whatever, but yet in the evening you're going to drive for a couple of hours, why? It's just it's a barrier to entry.
One of the things we advanced to the minister is a Class 5 plus. So we said, similar to what we do in the hospitality industry, as you know, Bert, when we do Serving It Right, it's an online, you have to pass the online course. We said, let's just add a few other elements to a Class 5. So we can up the safety thing here. And maybe it's an online course to certification and some awareness training on road signs and stuff. We can do that. But essentially the Class 4, I'm actually taking it right now just to sort of prove the point here. You learn how to drive, you learn about buses, you learn about commercial vehicles, you learn about big tires, you learn a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't have a lot of application to a passenger car. And so you've got to study the manual, pass a learner's license, and then you've got to book a road test. And in most cases, about 53% of the people fail either one of those things. So they got to keep going at it. They do recommend at ICBC you take a commercial driving course to pass the course, and that's $500. So you can see right now it could be a about $1,000 in about 2 or 3 months of your time to do this. What'll happen initially is we'll see a lot of people that have commercial Class 4 licenses, i.e. the taxi industry. You'll see a lot of those people migrate over to become rideshare drivers at the expense of the taxi industry, who already has a labor shortage. So, it's just careful what you hope for in these things, is that you try to do one thing, and of course it has another reaction adversely the other way.
Now, is the threat of ride sharing coming in up the game or the competition for taxi cab industry? Are they improving themselves in the province of British Columbia?
They've had 8 years to improve themselves, and I don't see any indication that they really have.
No, I agree with you. When I get out of the YVR and I take a taxi from the airport, it hasn't really improved that much at all.
Well, no, there's 2,400 taxi licenses approximately in Metro Vancouver, and they're owned by 104 owners. So 104 people own those licenses. And this is where the politics are, and most of the owners are vested in Surrey. And most of the industry is a South Asian industry, which is fine, but there's a very tight industry. So they put a lot of pressure on the government, and they're really mad now. And they basically told the government, and if you play this one wrong, you can't maybe expect our support in the next election. And they picked up, 2 or 3 extra seats in Surrey. So it's a very sensitive issue. And I get the Premier's sensitivity on that one. I mean, you can't walk off a cliff on this one. That's why I actually will applaud this government for getting it done. The Liberals didn't get it done, and the NDP actually brought it in. So good for them. And I think as we move forward, we'll make the adjustments. I think they'll get more comfortable with the data. Once you start seeing data, where the cars are, the drivers, all that kind of stuff, I think we'll see positive change, but it's going to take time.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you with respect to that. And the other part we find is now with the legalization of cannabis, plus we've always had the issue of liquor, people want to know that they can get home safe, and they don't want to be in a restaurant downtown Vancouver or in an event, and they have to wait forever for get a taxi. They want to ride.
Well, the example is, and that's why I really became passionate about this issue, because living on the North Shore, as you do as well, you don't really actually think about going downtown for dinner on the weekends.
Nope. Because
if you're lucky to get a cab, the chances of you getting a cab back are impossible. So I was reading something, and someone said, living in Seattle, someone will phone you up and say, you want to go for dinner? And you say, yes. What time? 8 o'clock. Thank you very much. Here, you want to go for dinner? 8 o'clock. Well, you're driving. How are you going to get there? Is it a bus, a taxi? You go on, and you get to a point, you say, you know what? It's not worth it.
Well, we're doing that this weekend. It's Friday night. We're having dinner. Where? West Vancouver, just down the street at our local restaurant. Yeah, we'd prefer to come downtown to Joe Forte's or one of these other restaurants, but we're not going to cross the bridge, either coming down or going back up. And secondly, tomorrow night's another dinner in West Van. So I just find that it is a barrier for people being able to move around. And it's the other thing I find with ride sharing is you feel safe because the driver, you know who the driver is, you know what kind of vehicle they're going to drive, you know their name, they pull up, everything's done electronically. You get in the car, it's a clean car, they usually have a bottled water for you in the back seat, and they take you to wherever you want to go. And the pickup is easy peasy. So I just find it's really terrific.
It's you've been in policy all your life. I find it really, I'll be more diplomatic than that, but it frustrates me to see politicians and bureaucrats making rules about things. I was at City Hall, we were talking about ride sharing, and I asked all the councillors, how many people have actually experienced Uber or Lyft? Only about 30% of them had, but they all had an opinion. And it's the same thing with the minister. The minister has never taken a ride share that I'm aware of. And so when she starts talking about safety in Class 4, we said, yeah, but are you aware what happens in that transaction? These companies require a criminal check. They require a driver's abstract. They require a car that's, I think, no later than 10 years or 5 years old, and the safety checks. And they're really diligent about that. So you can't say that they're unsafe. They're in the business of being safe. When you order it, you see who your driver is, what the license plate number is, what that driver's rating is before he even gets there, how much the fare is going to be. And then he sees Bert Hick, and he'll see your rating and what your history is. And so the transaction is so secure and it's so safe because if something goes wrong, now they have these facilities where you can literally hit an emergency on your app and say I'm in trouble, and they'll geolocate you everywhere. So it is really, really safe. You don't get in taxis. That's not what's happening in taxis.
No, I totally agree with you. In my experience, again, in the States with it, is if you're outside of a hotel or a major tourist attraction like the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. or someplace, there's usually a row of taxis. So you just jump in a taxi and you can go that way. But if you're in a situation where you need a specific ride to go someplace, Uber is terrific.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you can call it. And so to me, there's a market here for both to coexist. We just got to get to that point. And I agree with you that, quite frankly, we're a long time getting here, but I applaud the government this government for at least getting there. Slowly but surely. Now, are the municipalities going to wade in here and put in certain barriers or prohibitions, or is that going to be a difficult one? I've heard about congestion tax.
Oh, I know. Now they all jump in about congestion and lighting their hair on fire, and there's going to be too many cars. In fact, it really depends on the market you're in. So the facts are that if you have a good transportation system like we have here, then rideshare is going to be what they call first mile, last mile. So how do you get to your mode of public transportation? And at the end of that, how do you get home? So at 2 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the morning, you could take the SkyTrain. And when you get to SkyTrain, before you get to the end, you can order up your rideshare and you can get home safely. So it doesn't necessarily add to the congestion. And a lot of people, what they find out of Toronto is a lot of people are forgoing their second car. They're actually using rideshare now to go to the office. They're using other facilities within the application where you can actually travel with somebody else. So you can actually see in the app, well, there's Bert, he's going too. So there is some efficiencies in the system. But of course, the bureaucrats start screaming about congestion. They want to tax it before they have any facts. So we won't know for probably a year if there is congestion once they measure it, because the companies are going to give that data to the government. And now they're now looking at zones in Vancouver, pick up and drop off zones in certain parts of Vancouver. So where the cruise ship facility is, they've decided already that it's going to be too congested to have rideshare cars picking up passengers, so they'll be about 2 blocks away. But they're really, at the same time, giving it to the taxi industry because that's their domain down there. So we'll see. A congestion tax makes no sense. I mean, if you're going to tax everybody, not just rideshare people. And they had some other ideas about taxes, about curbside taxes and stuff. It's just a money grab. Instead of saying, let's just try it the way it is, let's make the adjustments, let's all move together, they just come up with crazy ideas. So, and they're uncoordinated. I mean, it may be that every company has to get a different operating license in every municipality and et cetera, et cetera. That's could be a business for you, Bert. You should get into that.
Yeah, well, I would find it fascinating because I'm a people person, and I would find it fascinating picking up people and finding what their life's about while I'm driving them from one point to another.
Get your class 4. Join me.
Yeah, we'll rent a bus. But I think it's terrific, and I think it's a case where the people want it, but government is placing a lot of barriers in the way of people getting access to what they want to have. The population wants to have access to rideshare. They want it. And it's just bizarre. I was in the lounge at the airport in Toronto last fall, waiting for my ride back to Vancouver. And I overheard a conversation from a couple of guys who were on my plane. And one guy said, the other guy said, hey, Vancouver, it's great. It's beautiful weather, beautiful city, great restaurants, but you can't get a goddamn taxi. And I just found that's interesting.
Well, imagine this. I could actually take the app. I could ask it to go pick up my mother-in-law who's medically challenged and getting elderly. And I could meet her. So the other day I had to take her to the dentist. So I had to drive all the way down to almost, Fraser and Southeast Marine Drive, and then all the way back into town. I could have easily had a rideshare car go pick her up and meet her there. There's all these conveniences that we've never even thought of that are life-changing for people. So it's going to be good.
Yeah,
It'll be good.
I think it'll be terrific for not just for the general population, but particularly for our industry, the liquor hospitality industry, the cannabis industry, who want to have access to this. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit here. Ian, you used to be in the wine industry, Cascadia Brands. Then you became president and CEO. And did you start the Restaurant Hall of Fame?
So you're right. I was in the wine business. We owned a company called Cascadia Brands, which at various times, that's a story in its own, was a public and private company. But we operated Kelowna Wines, the historic Kelowna Wines of the Sea, Granville Island Brewing. We had Burring Owl. We had Potter Distilling. We also had an import company that was run by Ingle Grady. Most people would recognize that name. And we had that. That was as I sort of started as a sales guy and ended up as president and CEO over 22 years. It was fascinating. It was during the time of VQA development in British Columbia. I chaired the Wine Institute, blah blah blah. And then in 2007, we were a private company. Our major shareholder went broke, and so we sold the company, and Peller bought it. And so I just decided after all these years, I was going to take a bit of a break, and then suddenly I got kind of people lonely. And someone phoned me, said the Restaurant Association they're recruiting. I went, no, really, those guys what do they really do? They were kind of useless. We paid all this money to them each year. Well, not that much money. But I didn't really understand them. Anyway, I got caught up in the interview process, and they hired me. And I've been there almost a decade, I guess, and it's been absolutely fascinating. Like, it's just because you can make a difference. I mean, there's 13,000 restaurants in British Columbia. There's 175,000 employees. It's one of the fourth largest industries in all of BC. It has a huge impact on people's lives, and it has a huge amount of issues. And being able to have, and I'll call it the privilege, of being in a position to influence those things on their behalf with government or with consumers, or be the face and the voice of the industry, I really take it to heart. I know many times you said to me, okay, you should move on and do something else. I do things on the outside, but I really feel that there were a couple of things that I really wanted to accomplish in the last, in my mind. One was ride sharing. I guess that's off my list now.
Not quite. Not totally.
Yeah, almost. So I'll hang around for a bit. And the other one is, and it's one of the issues we can talk about, is some pricing issues with respect to liquor in the industry and how it relates to the restaurant industry and the bar industry. So I kind of got caught up in it, and I gained the trust of the previous government, and I was able to gain the trust of this government, which I was quite concerned about. But it's working well. We do a number of programs like Eat, Drink Local, which, promoting local food. As I was telling you this morning, we're rewriting a manual that we invented a few years back called Restaurant Regulations Made Easy, which is compiling all the regulations and then putting it in plain English so restaurants who have a lot of regulation that they have to comply with understand. So I think these things make a difference. Some people say that we're useless, we don't do anything. I get that. But I think we make a lot of difference in a lot of people's lives in terms of handling issues like things like minimum wage and the mayor of Vancouver trying to ban natural gas and all those kinds of things. You naturally need an organization in the middle of all that to try to become the spokesperson, try to settle out on behalf of the industry. So it's quite fascinating.
So is your biggest issue, as I understand with the restaurant industry, apart from the regulatory stuff that we deal with, is the biggest issue labor shortage? So you've got an initiative underway with respect to that.
So get this. We did a labor study about a year and a half ago. And so in British Columbia, we are, for every 3 people that retire, we're only putting 2 people back in the workforce naturally. So we need immigration. In other words, the government will say, we need 900,000 workers in the next 10 years in British Columbia, and we can only fill 600,000 of those. So we have a gap of 300,000, which is immigration. In our industry, we estimate that the 13,000 restaurants, we estimate a labor shortage, get this, drum roll, 18 to 25,000 people short in our industry. And it's primarily in kitchens. And so, that's not much. You think it's like maybe 2 people per restaurant. And the reason for that is really demographics. People say, they don't pay enough, but actually they do now. I mean, the whole thing has changed a lot because restaurants are paying a lot more to both attract and retain labor. It's one of demographics. And it's also one of the domestic people don't really want to be working in restaurants. There's a bit of an attitude thing there. So it's very serious, and we looked at this. I went to El Salvador a year ago with the honorary consul of El Salvador. We actually had an agreement with El Salvador to source workers, but we found out that they were primarily unskilled workers. We have a program now, which is we access trained foreign skilled workers from all around the world with one of the best immigration consultants in Canada. And it's half the time and half the price. So it takes about 3 to 4 months to bring in the right candidate, and it costs about $1,800 to do that, $1,000 of which goes to the federal government. And we take it right from the identification of the job that the restaurant needs to giving the restaurant candidates that they can choose from. They set up Skype calls. They make the decision on hiring. The person comes to Canada. They're met at the airport. They're taken to Service Canada to get all their credentials. Like, it's really well done and very professional. Because when you're bringing somebody in to a new country, that's a big experience. These people are coming here. The difference is to become Canadian citizens. So this is not like I'm taking a temporary job. I'm going to be a ski lift operator and go back to Australia. These people are coming here with a minimum of 5 years experience. They have a degree, and they are intending to become Canadian citizens. So it's a whole quality level. So they're here to perform. They're with that employer for a minimum of 2 years, most likely 3, because they start to apply for their immigration status. And here's a funny story. We've placed about 300 workers since January in this program. And I could just do this like 7 days a week. It just, we had a worker that was offered a job with a restaurant in Vancouver, and this worker was on a cruise ship. And on cruise ships, they work 7 days a week for 6 months in a row. So he got an offer, and he phoned up our immigration consultant, said, "This is great," but he said, I thought this was a full-time job. He goes, "Well, it is a full-time job." He goes, "Well, it's only 40 hours a week. It's only 38 hours a week." And they go, "Well, that's what we work here." And this guy goes, "Well, I work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like, what am I going to do with all this time? And what am I going to do on the weekends?" And he was really quite concerned. He just thought, this is kind of silly. Like, why would I waste my time coming there to only work 40 hours? So what we find when they come into Canada, they work so hard. They are so keen to learn. They're so keen to integrate. And there's some of the best workers. We're finding that restaurants now are using trained foreign workers as a sort of cornerstone for their kitchens, because they know those workers are going to be there and they're dedicated. And it is really helping. It's really, really helping. And talk about great attitude. They're so grateful to be in Canada. They're so grateful to have a job. They're so grateful, get this, to make $15 an hour. That's the starting wage. It's an average wage. And people say, well, that's what the issue here is, where they live. Well, what we do is that we network them. So we'll say Bert is coming in from, off a cruise ship. Bert's experience, he's going to go work in a restaurant downtown, and that goes out to all the people that are currently in here right now. And guess what? They'll absorb you. Your other people that are in the marketplace that are doing the same thing as you, they'll say, "I have a room here. I know someone in there," or someone in the staff. So it's easy to be absorbed, and they're not looking for their own apartment and a car, and all the fixings of life. They in most cases, they're quite happy to share with 3 or 4 people, because that's where they come from. Keep it simple. They're here to work. They're here to prove themselves. They're here to create an environment for their families. And so the program is really good, and I think it's good for Canada, because we throughout British Columbia, in all sectors, we have this massive labor shortage, and it's our biggest issue.
So this program is ongoing, and if people want to get more information about it, how do they do that?
Thanks, Bert. Just contact the British Columbia Restaurant Association, and contact me. Just phone and just talk to me personally, and I'll connect you with our all the information is there. But I'll be happy to connect them with our immigration consultant.
I commend what you're doing there, because we do licensing of restaurants, hotels, and pubs, and one of the big issues they have is labor shortages. We've had the case where restaurants are opening, but they're not sure they can open because of lack of labor. We have restaurant groups that have multiple units in the province, and they have to bring staff down from their other places to work in the place that they're opening just to get the place open.
Yeah.
And it's a huge issue, and I only see it getting worse in the province because of the fact that we have an explosion of restaurants happening. And I was at a presentation yesterday by Tourism Vancouver and Destinations BC, where the growth in the tourism industry is only going up by a significant amount in the next several years, which means more and more demand for people to serve the hospitality industry.
Well, the other interesting thing too is that the way they build condos and apartments in Vancouver, restaurants actually serve as the kitchen. If you're living in a little tiny apartment, 600 square feet, you go downstairs and you hang out in the restaurant, you meet people. That's your kitchen. That's your place to entertain. So they're very, very important. And that's why when when Mayor Robertson and ex-Mayor Robertson decided that natural gas, turning off the natural gas in Vancouver would be a great move for the environment, that really upset a lot of people because, 99% of the restaurants have some form of natural gas cooking. So it's another one of those issues.
No, I agree with you. That was caught a lot of people by surprise by trying to eliminate natural gas because you have to have natural gas to cook in a restaurant or hospitals, anywhere needs it. Switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk to you about other issues affecting the hospitality industry, other regulations, policies, impediments. One of the people you're inducting into the Restaurant Hall of Fame is Bruce Fox. And years ago, Bruce used to be president of Boston Pizza. And Boston Pizza had this issue about TV monitors. And they could only have 3 TV monitors in a restaurant. And thank God the government eventually saw a way to allow more than 3 TV monitors that were 21 inches in screen size and move forward. What major issues is the restaurant industry facing in terms of either provincial or municipal regulation? Is there any issues at the City of Vancouver level you're concerned about?
Who dreams up this stuff, right? I mean, we have an issue right now in the City of Vancouver, which is lurking. They want to, for example, because they feel that most people need to understand the alcohol content of their drinks, they would like every restaurant in Vancouver to take their wine list, all their cocktails and all their beers, and every single drink and every wine list item would say, this is the serving size, and this is how much alcohol is in that. And so you would have to take about 1,200 restaurant licensed in Vancouver, and they'd have to reprint their menus, they'd have to redesign their menus, and put all this information on. So we showed the city, wine will vary from about 12 to 14%. So it's really a 6-ounce glass is one serving. A vodka and soda is one serving, 1 ounce at 40 ounces. But the interesting one was craft beer, where you could have 4%, which would be one serving, or you could have an 8% craft beer. That's 2 servings. There is an issue there. But you don't have to reprint every list in the whole city just to prove the issue. So we said, we'll have a generic sheet, and if anybody wants to know what it is, we'll say, here's what wine is, here's what cocktails are, here's what beer is. Read it. And they go, oh, I don't know. We think that people want more information. I don't know who these people are. But those are the kinds of issues that, we spent hours on that issue. And I just spoke to them again the other day, and I think the issue is still out there. They actually think, because 4 people that work at City Hall, as they told me, had gone to an exercise class and went to Joey to have a glass of wine, they were really concerned about the alcohol content. And my answer was, why are you even drinking if you're so concerned about that? Like, be sensible. And we see regulation like this all the time where they're very insensitive and unaware as to the challenges of a business owner, which some of the issues they're faced with is regulation. They're regulated by the health department, the fire department, the liquor, WorkSafe, labor. They have to file all their employment criteria with the federal government. It goes on. And they've got to somehow keep track of all that and do it right, make sure all their people are licensed to drink alcohol or serve alcohol. They're serving it right. They have to run a business. They have to pay increasing property taxes. So there's a very I'll tell you who it is. It's public knowledge. The White Spot on West Broadway pays close to $600,000 in property tax each year because they're taxed on highest and best use. That's almost $1,500 a day in sales just to pay property tax. So those kinds of things are driving the industry. They'll drive out the small operators, which are very charming. I mean, that's where you get a lot of your new trends that develop in the bigger guys can sustain it because they have the purchasing power, both from buying the stuff that they sell, but also being able to negotiate better leases because they're highly attractive. So that's a big problem.
So what you're telling me is that if you're a chain restaurant like Cactus Club, Earl's, Joey's, and you've got multiple units in the province of British Columbia, Brown Social House is another example, Joseph Richards Group. If you're an establishment in Vancouver, you'd have to print a special drink price menu and drink strength menu for Vancouver. as compared to the other part of the province.
That's what's looming. Yeah, it's and I hope, actually, you know what? I sort of hope it happens. This will be the greatest public relations, and you're going to get involved in this too, and we'll stop that because, at the same time, all these restaurants are paying such exorbitant, licensing fees. You know that all their patios, if it's on city property, they're paying all that extra fees, business license fees, and now they're going to make them do this kind of stuff, and so that's the danger. Minimum wage was a real issue. This government, the last government, wanted to raise the minimum wage by way of the consumer price index. So it was around $11 going up 3 or 4%. This government came in, so we're going to 15, and we went, that's not good. But what they did do, and I give them credit, is that they actually did stage this over about 3 years. So it's like what's happening in the United States right now, where there's so much uncertainty, things are going sideways. The stock market went crazy today and everything else because there's no certainty. But that the way the government dealt with that was with some certainty, and business owners can make those adjustments. Prices are going up, there's no question. It does hurt the business owner because labor is about 30% of their overall cost in an operation. But at the same time, wages were naturally rising because of the labor shortage. So that actually worked out not too bad for us. I think apart from just general ongoing things, some of the significant issues that we're trying to deal with is on the liquor distribution branch. It causes problems for license. They're a $3 billion operation that tries to operate like Costco, and they operate like a corner store in terms of their disciplines and operating. So people don't get products, and they can't get products to market, and they take a full advantage of the marketplace in terms of pricing. So we're paying too much. There is a review, thank goodness. There's a review going on this right now, which we'll see. And the big issue, and we're working with this government on, and I think they understand it, the minister, is wholesale pricing for liquor. So for those that are listening to this that don't know this, is that restaurants pay the same price as a consumer does, right off the shelf. And we've asked for some relief in that, even if it's 10%, 8%, something, to offset the rising costs of food and labor and taxes and occupancy costs that are happening on the other side. So I feel about 50% confident on that one, Bert, that'll happen. The way the government sees these kinds of things, though, they'll say that's going to cost us $40 million, and which is nothing in the $3 billion operation out there. But what we think it's going to do is actually they'll make more money by doing this. If they actually look at their systems and create some efficiencies, they'll easily absorb that $40 million. But they see it as a cost. So they'll say, well, at the expense of what healthcare and education is supposed to spend this money, they never look at it in terms of how do we create efficiencies within the retail operations of our liquor stores to easily absorb that kind of price.
No, I think that's a huge issue, and we're all optimistic and hopeful that that'll happen as a result of the review that was done. The other one we hear about is licensee-to-licensee sales, where if you're a restaurant and you want to buy 3 bottles of a premium vodka, rare scotch, that you can go down to a specialized private liquor store like Legacy Liquor Store and buy it and not have to go through the LDB lengthy, ongoing process to get that 3 bottles, and if you do order it, you might only get 1 bottle.
Well, and the reality is kind of like ride sharing. There's about 5 or 6 companies that operate in Richmond that cater to the Asian market. Their sales are about $20 million last year, and they're completely operating illegally. And so when the government blocks these sort of things, the market kind of moves around it anyways, and the market will find its own solutions. In that particular case, there is a lot of activity, and we've told the government this, and I don't have an opinion to say, we're not supposed to do it, but a lot of people have to do it because they can't get the product. But there's a lot of licensee sales that happen in the province anyways. It doesn't get reported. The government's just better off to deal with it and be open about it and capture the people in the right system, versus what happened with the whiskey. The gentleman had the whiskey place. He got everything confiscated because some disgruntled person decided to turn him in. So, and then when, as you know, having the experience you had when you reported that stuff, the government has to act on it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It reminds me of an old quote. There's a wise French philosopher and politician who once said, "There go the people. I must get behind them and follow them, for I am their leader." And I find that with RideShare. The people want that. The government should get behind them and go with them because they want that. Same with this sort of thing. They want access. They want to not have a government puts up barriers. Okay, switching gears a bit. World of cannabis.
Yeah.
Edibles coming on stream, licensed establishments that can sell liquor. People can now go out from a restaurant, out to the sidewalk, smoke a joint, come back in during their dinner like most people do with a cigarette. They can also now, later this year, be able to have an edible while they're sitting at the table. Probably illegal, but they'll have an edible. What are the implications for the restaurant industry around that? And then combined with that is what you referred to earlier was this manual that you're putting together for restaurants on policies and procedures, enforcement and compliance, and how to operate a restaurant successfully.
You know, it's we haven't had a lot of restaurants overly concerned about cannabis, and this is my own thought. You might disagree with me. I think we had a cannabis culture here, anyways. There's nothing like, oh my God, we can now go to liquor store and buy liquor. Like if you're doing cannabis, you're doing cannabis. So I don't know incrementally if that's really expanded all that much. Maybe where you're getting it from and different things. I think edibles. Totally. I think edibles is having more of an impact. I think it's easier to sit at a table and have an edible if you so wish. But in our sector, most people go to restaurants aren't there to get high and go, hey, let's start dancing the tables. So for us, it's a bit more civil. Certainly for those situations where people go outside and smoke a joint and come back in, the whole issue of liability is way higher now. And you're really good at that. And I know you've got some great materials that deals with how to recognize that, how to deal with that and stuff. But it's pretty hard with, judging a person's intoxication, whether it's by alcohol, by drugs, by cannabis. I mean, it could be intoxication by a whole bunch of things. So all we can do is just have really strong due diligence when the servers are there, observing behavior and stuff. And just, if you have to cut it off, you have to cut it off. If you have to phone a RideShare car now, which would be a lot easier than a taxi, that's going to help greatly. So the implications there, I don't know. I think if this was this is the first rodeo, and we'd never seen cannabis in this province, but this province was pretty rooted in cannabis. It has been for years, and I don't think anybody's going, hey, this is great. In fact, people I know that love cannabis haven't changed their behaviors. They're still buying from their dealers, and they don't really care about the retail stores. So I think we're going to be all right there, and I think it is wise for us. So, and the programs you have is to educate and inform, though, to try to avoid.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's important for the staff to be aware of the issue.
Yeah,
but you are right. Cannabis has been in the British Columbia illegal, then became semi-legal. Governments like the city of Vancouver recognized it. Police weren't really concerned about it. I always found it fascinating when we do the licensing of a music festival, or you go to a concert at Rogers Arena or a stadium up country. Yeah. We do everything we can to prevent somebody selling wine to a minor and to stop somebody buying 2 glasses of wine and handing one off to a minor. And we're trying to stop intoxication. But you look over the mosh pit in front of the stage, and there's this blue haze hanging over it when it was illegal. And it looks like a bunch of whales spouting because of this blue haze. And you just think, okay, we're in a licensed establishment. We're doing all this stuff to stop alcohol. But yet over here, there's all this illegal activity going on. And the RCMP who are watching the show are just standing, leaning against the wall with their arms crossed, not doing anything.
Yeah, a while back, I remember going to Santana concert, and there's no smoking in the arena. People smoked. There was cannabis was illegal. People were lighting up big time, and no one cared. My kid goes like, "What's going on here?" I say, "How do you explain that, right?" So
5 years ago, I was at a Rod Stewart concert at Rogers Arena, and girls, 4 women right in front of us, pulled out a joint, lit it up. Okay, this is interesting. Illegal, but they do it.
And what are you going to do, right? The cops are going to shut down Rod Stewart to go pull out 4 ladies from a concert. So, yeah.
So I agree. I tend to agree with you. One area where we find it fascinating is with golf courses, where on the playing surface of the golf course, where you can smoke cannabis anywhere you can smoke a cigarette. So guys and girls can be out there smoking a stogie, cigarettes, but now they can smoke cannabis. And then you've got the beverage cart running around. You've got the kiosks. And at the end of it, there's this a liability issue if something happens. And so it's a bit of there are risk factors a little bit higher because you can actually do it in a licensed area.
Well, the gentleman who he still has a store open. I can't remember what his name is, but he's the one that's well known in Vancouver.
The cannabis stores?
Yeah, he's selling mushrooms now. That's taking a whole new trend. So I've heard this is that, cannabis is all right, but mushrooms are awesome. The way better experience, but they're being sold, quote, illegal. They're not legal, but they're being sold. You can go down the street and buy them. So it's a culture we live in. So you'll probably have some more licensing in mushroom stores soon. Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you a personal question.
Yeah.
I know you've got 2 dogs, and you used to have 3 dogs, but you also were president of the David Foster Foundation. How did that come about, and what does the David Foster Foundation do?
Thanks for bringing it up. I went in the wine business. I had a call once, and I had a call, and it was David Foster Foundation. Victoria's having an event, and they need 50 cases of wine. And Labatt's were doing the beer, and they didn't have a wine supplier. So I went in my mind, David Foster. I love this guy. Like, I love his music. I love Earth, Wind, and Fire, and all the stuff that he did. And he was at the beginning of his career, but highly influential producer. Chicago was another one. These are all my bands that I love because I was a drummer and a trumpet player, sort of.
Growing up in Kelowna.
And
when you weren't on your water skis.
Yeah. So I would David Foster. So I said, we're in. So we donated the 50 cases of wine, and it was absolutely fascinating. So year one, I was completely misdirected because I sort of thought this is a great way to go schmooze with all David's buddies. And who was there were I think the first year was Michael J. Fox, Olivia Newton-John and stuff. And we were all in the green room, and it was this is kind of interesting. But year 2, when it happened again, we donated the 50 cases of wine, and I said, you know what, I don't want anything. I don't want tickets. Because I suddenly realized that what the foundation is trying to do is raise money for families whose children need transplants. And it covers the non-medical costs of that procedure. And it can be, you can have $1 million in your bank account and maybe not be able to cover it. It is brutal. Sometimes the families have to move to Edmonton. They have to keep 2 homes, apart from all the psychological worry, and maybe sit for 6 or 8 months waiting for a donor. So I got involved with that. And then about year 3, or year 4, I sort of thought this would be really interesting to do this event outside of Victoria and do it in Kelowna. So I phoned David. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to phone David Foster. And I was talking to him. I was literally shaking. I don't know why, because he's a really, really nice guy. But
he's a legend.
I know. And I'm not the legend, right? And so he goes, well, I said, David, can we, do you think about this? And he goes, I don't know. And then all of a sudden it happened. He said, okay, great. So we're now going to do it in Victoria. We had Julio Iglesias. The little town of Kelowna went upside down because people are writing in the statement, we don't take away from our bingo nights and all this confusion and what's going on in our little city here. But we raised $400,000 several years ago. And then I was asked to join the board, which I did for, I don't know, it was 23 years of that. And then I was the president for 2 years. It was all volunteer work. And then we hired a CEO, which was really necessary because the foundation had grown so much that it was going across Canada, and it's a full-time job. I could write a book on that whole, what the influence that David had in my life and the things that I did. And he's really, really neat guy. He's a really talented guy. He's so committed, and you learn this, he's so committed to the cause of families, and I mean, that'll be his legacy. He actually believes his legacy will be not the music. Is probably the best music producer in our lifetime. He wants to be known as the legacy of the David Foster Foundation. So that was really interesting. That was really a highlight of my life. Not that my life is over, but thus far.
As I understand it, his start in the foundation was the fact that his mother phoned him when he was in L.A. and said that a girl from Vancouver, I think it was a girl from Victoria, was down in L.A. in a hospital awaiting I think it was a liver transplant. Mm-hmm. And his mother said you should go and visit her because a friend of the family. And he went to the hospital, and that's where he got caught up in this.
Yeah, he walked in, and his mother, Miss Eleanor Foster, she was just the most. She's like Barbara Bush. Yeah. She was so awesome. And she's passed, but and David's father died at an early age. So she ran David. I mean, David would get on stage, and pardon me, he'd say like, this is great. And she'd go, David, you can't swear. You can't say those kind of things. He'd go, sorry, Mom. I won't do it again. So she was always a guiding light for him. So she phoned him and said, there's one of ours in LA hospital. He went there, and he said to her, there's one thing that I could do for you. What would that be? And she said, I want to see my sister. So he flew her little sister down, and then eventually she died. But that was the start of it. And he said he realized that there's all these things that happen when people have unfortunate situations and get sick that we could easily help with and provide those magical things. So I think the foundation has helped about 500 families over the years. It's over 30 years old now. We've got somewhere in the midst now about $30 million in the bank and headed for 50. And I don't think David's giving up anytime soon on that.
It's great. Do they have any more events coming up?
No, they're doing some smaller private events. The big one we had in Vancouver a couple of years ago was hard to organize and very costly. So he's taking small pools of people, like about 100 people, and going somewhere. They went to a resort on Vancouver Island, and they'll walk out and they'll raise $1 million quite simply. It'll be an evening with David.
Yeah.
He'll do something because he can't stop himself. He just loves that so much, and it's so going to see an evening performance, as you know, with David Foster is amazing and a surprise. I mean, I think the last one you were at, Muhammad Ali was there in Victoria, which was cool.
Yeah, and Pamela Anderson was there, plus Canadian tenors. It was just a phenomenal show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it was really great. Well, Ian, listen, thanks for coming in to joining us on our show today. Very much appreciate you being part of License to Chill. And I hope you'll come back and keep us posted on the issues we talked about today. And if you ever need to talk about anything, give us a call.
Well, Bert, and I want to thank you, and thank you for what you do at Rising Tide, because you've really developed an incredible platform to guide our industry through the complexities of licensing, which is critical. You're always a great resource for us to send people to solve problems. And now in the cannabis space. So good for you for taking that on. So it's always a pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The preceding podcast was recorded at Studio 710 in downtown Vancouver, the home of Jade Maple. For more information, follow us online at risingtideconsultants.ca.